My dear friend, it seems you have recently taken up Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. How marvelous! In all my years of observing the complexities of crime and human nature, I have never encountered a more profound case file on the depths of the human psyche than this work. Come, sit here. Take a chair by the fire. The weather outside is dreadful, but with the light of this study, we can safely travel into the damp, mist-shrouded streets of 19th century St. Petersburg, Imperial Russia. What do you make of the protagonist, Raskolnikov? Many readers dismiss him as a mere murderer, but that is far too simplistic. When unraveling a case, the motive is paramount, yet the motive of this young man is a far cry from common robbery. It was not for money that he killed. No, he killed a monster born of the bloated theory within his own mind. As you are aware, Russia at that time was in the midst of great turmoil. Rationalism flowing in from the West, rapid social upheaval, and the pervasive stench of poverty. That stifling atmosphere fermented a terrifying logic within the mind of this brilliant, proud young man. The idea that mankind is divided into the ordinary and the extraordinary. This is a most dangerous spark of thought. The claim that the extraordinary may transcend conventional moral rules for the sake of human evolution, that is to say, they have the right to eliminate a few vermin. Raskolnikov sought to prove this hypothesis himself. To determine if he truly belonged to the ranks of men like Napoleon, he chose to conduct an experiment. The murder of that greedy, usurious old woman, Alyona. But my friend, let us pause and consider this. This Superman ideology that ensnared him is lurking all around us, even today. The conceit that one is special, that one's own logic and justice should take precedence over the happiness or lives of others, has this not taken on new forms, enveloping our modern society as well? Do you not see it? So many people hiding behind the shields of their own theories, severing their empathy for others, and retreating into the shells of their own making. He was intoxicated by his own theory. But look at his actions at the moment of the crime, or immediately after. He trembles in terror. He is consumed by fever. He loses all balance of mind. From my experience, before he was a criminal, he was a victim trapped in the cage of his own logic. He tried to logically justify the act of murder. Yet there exists in the human spirit something that even the sharpest blade of logic cannot sever. Perhaps it is what we call a conscience, or perhaps it is a primal bond that connects us to our fellow man. When he carried out that murder, it was not merely the old woman's life he extinguished. He severed his own spirit, that very human life that should have remained within him. My friend, we struggle to define who we are. But if we pursue that answer through the means of theory or proof of detachment, we end up like Raskolnikov, isolating ourselves from the world and imprisoning ourselves in the cell of solitude. He wandered through that thick, yellow, murky fog of St. Petersburg not because he did not know the way, but because the map of his own logic was entirely unlike the reality of the wilderness he faced. Now we must speak of the figures who surrounded him. Sonya, who looked upon him with such unwavering eyes, and the ruinous Marmeladov. How did they confront Raskolnikov's lonely logic? I have spoken at length. Is your tea still warm? The mystery of literature, like any case, is best unraveled without haste. My dear friend, I am relieved to see your tea is still warm. Let us press on through this deep fog. We must observe how the young man, Raskolnikov, having fallen from the thin ice of the theory he constructed, faced the truth that lay beneath. As I mentioned before, he sought to be a solitary Superman by isolating himself in a world of closed logic. But the world is, by nature, not such a simple place. Against his solitary logic, this story presents two powerful others, Marmeladov and his daughter, Sonya. Let us begin with the man named Marmeladov. He is a man who drowns in drink, casts his family into the abyss of extreme poverty, and can only prove his own existence by speaking of his own degradation. It is easy to dismiss him as a mere drunkard, but observe him carefully. He is the most raw, visceral sample of how a human being, no matter how weak or how unreasonable their circumstances, will still struggle in search of redemption. While Raskolnikov attempted to categorize humanity through arrogant intellect, Marmeladov casts off all the high-minded armor of intelligence and while wallowing in the mud, cries out, "I am weak." Is it not this very helpless, clumsy weakness that touches the essence of human existence? And then there is his daughter, Sonya. Her existence is the most unexpected yet decisive error in Raskolnikov's logical system. Sonya sacrifices herself to save her family, casting her soul into a brutal environment. By all conventional standards, she is at the very bottom of society, a powerless figure. And yet, in her eyes, dwells a truth that Raskolnikov, for all his meticulous theorizing, could never reach. My point is not that Sonya is simply a pious saint. She does not preach to Raskolnikov. She simply stands in the same place as he does and takes his sin upon herself. It is akin to Kant's categorical imperative, but far more intuitive, far more imbued with living blood. To Raskolnikov, who treated others as means, she offers an unconditional acceptance of him as an end, in other words, as an irreplaceable human being. For Raskolnikov, this must have been an unbearable humiliation. To him, who sought to prove his status as a superman through his own intellect, this incomprehensible devotion was the most powerful rejection, rendering his logic meaningless. And yet, at the same time, it was within this very Sonya that he found the last bastion of the humanity he had tried so hard to discard. My friend, imagine this, if you will. The moment you are convinced you have completed a perfect deduction and grasped the truth of a case, an unforeseen emotional variable causes your carefully constructed logic to collapse with a thunderous roar. For Raskolnikov, Sonya was exactly that uncontrollable variable. Even as he sensed his logic crumbling, it was precisely because of that fragility that he was able, for the first time, to touch the warmth of another. We are all like Raskolnikov. We desperately try to appear strong and wise. Upon the stage of society, we brandish our own private theories and build walls between ourselves and others. But what Dostoevsky is asking us through this story is not some naive question. It is far more cruel and far deeper. Are you prepared to acknowledge your own weakness and shoulder the weakness of others? The muddy reality of Marmeladov and the quiet suffering of Sonya, these two figures slowly erode the arrogant intellect of Raskolnikov, and indeed, our own as well. This is how literature works. It quietly infiltrates the castles of logic we so desperately guard and shakes them to their very foundations. Now, let us explore the literary soil of 19th century Russia and how Dostoevsky himself was able to capture this extreme state of the human psyche. Do stay with me for a while longer, until I have finished lighting my pipe. My dear friend, the fire in the hearth has settled a bit. If you require a second cup of tea, do not hesitate to ask. Illuminated by the two mirrors of Sonya and Marmeladov, we have begun to see just how Raskolnikov's logic began to unravel. From here, we must step into the literary soil of the man who created this tale, Fyodor Dostoevsky. When you think of 19th century Russian literature, names like Gogol or Turgenev may come to mind. But Dostoevsky employed a method entirely different from his predecessors. What he presented to us was not a tranquil epic. He was a surgeon of the psyche, dissecting the human consciousness placed in states of extreme crisis. What I have long found noteworthy in his work is polyphony, that is, a multi-voiced structure. In an ordinary novel, the author's ideology reigns as the absolute truth of the narrative. But in Dostoevsky's work, it is different. Raskolnikov's arrogant reasoning, Sonya's silent prayers, and Svidrigailov's nihilistic emptiness, all these ideas possess a life of their own, transcending the author's control, colliding and resonating with one another. It is as if I were in a chess match against Professor Moriarty, while numerous spectators debated the game from different perspectives outside the board. Why did he paint humans with such intensity, driving them to the very edge? It is deeply connected to the harsh realities of his own life. My friend, are you aware that in his youth he was sentenced to death and pardoned only at the very moment of execution? What does a man see in that instant, having returned from the very brink of death? He saw the naked human, stripped bare, remaining in the inner depths of the individual after all social norms, law, and morality had vanished. Psychological description in literature is not merely an enumeration of emotions. Dostoevsky unflinchingly wrote down the nerve-grating contradictions of a man who hates and loves at the same time, who feels envy and contempt simultaneously. This matches to a startling degree the irrationality I face when analyzing the psyche of a criminal. Man is often defined as a logical creature, but in truth, he is profoundly irrational. He often acts against his own interests and at times even shuts the door to his own path toward happiness. Dostoevsky vividly captured this irrational void within the human being set against the oppressive social landscape of 19th century Russia. The damp basements of St. Petersburg, the squalid apartments, and the labyrinthine brains of criminals, all of these were laboratories for illuminating the existence of man. My friend, are you satisfied with the novels of today? So many modern works are content to offer the reader pleasant satisfaction or simple, easy lessons. Yet, to unravel Dostoevsky is to reject such shallow consensus. He provides the reader with no answers. He merely presents the complexity of the human enigma and its bottomless abyss for us to behold. In my own investigations, the moment of grasping the truth is always filled with this same Dostoevsky intention. When every piece of evidence is gathered and the motive logically constructed, at the very last, something that defies explanation, that human burden, stands in the way. Dostoevsky did not conceal this inexplicable something, but placed it at the center of his narrative. That is why his works never grow old. Times change, and with them the rules of society and the nature of justice. But the psychological structure of a human, suffering in their own contradictions, seeking salvation in others, or drifting toward ruin, that is startlingly unchanged. Now, we have reached the heart of this tale. We shall move to the solution, where we discuss what we ought to learn from Raskolnikov's fate. Are you prepared? The investigation known as thought is most fascinating from here on out.
Now, my friend, we have ventured through the damp mists of St. Petersburg, touched upon the arrogant theory of one young man, and felt the grace that sought to enfold him. Finally, we must ask ourselves, was Raskolnikov truly judged? The court sentenced him to exile in Siberia, yet that was merely a procedural measure to preserve the social order. The true punishment Dostoevsky intended to depict lies far beyond such bureaucratic formalities. For him, the genuine punishment was nothing less than the fact that he could no longer escape from himself. Many prefer to interpret his fate as one of redemption, that he was saved by Sonya's love. But I would venture to say this: what he arrived at was not salvation, but rather the acceptance of his own finitude. He realized he could never be Napoleon. He was not an extraordinary man destined to rule over others, but a weak, imperfect human being, an ordinary soul, longing to connect with his fellow man. He finally swallowed the bitter reality of that truth.
We are all too prone to defining ourselves in life as special beings, achieving some grand purpose or adhering to some lofty rationale. In modern society, this tendency seems only to accelerate. Status, success, the judgment of others. When those external suits of armor are stripped away, will you, like Raskolnikov, fall into despair at the stranger that is yourself? Or will you be able to forgive that naked self? To read literature is to be forced into this very confrontation with the self. While comics and art provide wonderful stimulation, the written word is akin to transplanting the thoughts of another directly into your own mind. To read Dostoevsky and re-experience the anguish of Raskolnikov is synonymous with unearthing the other criminal or the other saint slumbering within your own heart. My friend, we are in need of mystery solving. In order to unravel the most difficult enigma in the world, that of our own psyche, we must repeatedly pore over the case files of great literature. This is by no means nostalgia, gazing backward at the past. It is the training required to face this uncertain, irrational reality, not by merely drifting along, but by confronting it squarely as a human being with a will of one's own. The case, the story, closes here. Yet the investigation that is your life continues. Once you have finished Raskolnikov's tale, when you look out the window, the streets and the people passing by should look a little different than they did before. You will realize that they too are carrying their own burdens of theory and living their lives in earnest, each bearing their own punishment. Come, I have spoken enough. The fire in the hearth has died out completely. I hope the night fog is not too thick on your way home. When you visit this study again, I look forward to you bringing another case, no, another masterpiece to examine. For the monster that is humanity is one that I shall never tire of observing. Until we meet again, my friend, I wish for your own investigation, the mystery that is your life, to become deeper and richer still.